Pretending to be ready for peace talks while simultaneously threatening the world with nuclear weapons is one of Putin's favorite tactics, and now he's decided to use it again. This week, the Kremlin dictator announced that Moscow is beginning preparations for new nuclear tests in response to actions by the United States. But let's take a closer look at what exactly Russia is planning to respond to. Who was the first to escalate the situation? And what could all of this lead to? So, let's analyze how events have unfolded over the past 2 weeks. On October 26th, Putin announced that Russia had tested the Burevestnik cruise missile with a nuclear propulsion system. He placed special emphasis on the missile's unlimited range. In response, U.S. President Donald Trump stated that the United States has the most powerful nuclear submarine in the world right off the coast of Russia. You'd think this would make Kremlin officials pause and reconsider making such threats. But as early as October 29th, Putin started talking about tests of the Poseidon underwater drone, which also has a nuclear power unit. And just a few hours later, during a meeting at the White House, Trump ordered the armed forces to immediately begin testing nuclear weapons. By the way, the U.S. command does not link the launch of the Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile to Trump's statement. But on November 5th, the Kremlin urgently convened a Security Council meeting where a statement was made about Russia preparing for new nuclear tests.
All these threats are further evidence of the worsening relationship between the leaders of the U.S. and Russia. It is likely that, at this stage, threats from Moscow and Washington are merely being used as tools of political pressure. However, a decision to conduct such tests by either America or Russia would raise nuclear tensions to levels not seen since the height of the Cold War. From a publication by the Wall Street Journal.
By the way, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte responded ironically to Putin's statement about nuclear tests. When asked by journalists whether the alliance would respond to this and what that response might be, Rutte said that he stopped reacting long ago to the meetings Putin convenes. He said basically that Putin gets paid for it, so that's why he holds them. Western experts are also quite skeptical about the Russian Burevestnik missile itself. Since 2017, according to intelligence reports, Russia has conducted at least 10 tests of this missile, and most of them ended in failure. The missile itself has been nicknamed the Flying Chernobyl because of its nuclear power unit, which, in the event of an accident, could cause radioactive contamination.
This Kremlin superweapon has three main drawbacks that technically make it a white elephant: subsonic speed and vulnerability. Unlike hypersonic missiles, the Burevestnik flies slower, making it easier to intercept with fighter jets or destroy with other air defense systems. High cost. The nuclear reactor and complex systems make producing such missiles extremely expensive. Questionable practicality. To achieve maximum range, the cruise missile is forced to climb to altitudes where it can be detected by satellites and long-range radars. At the same time, flying low is not economically viable for a jet engine. Hamish de Britton-Gordon, military analyst for The Telegraph.
Russia also presents the Poseidon super torpedoes as revolutionary weapons capable of destroying entire countries and devastating coastlines, claiming they are absolutely invulnerable and more powerful than nuclear missiles. But in the West, these torpedoes are seen more as a symbol of intimidation than as actual combat weapons. They are too large for conventional submarines and require their own specialized vessel. Experts are also skeptical about Poseidon's supposed ability to trigger tsunamis.
The missile is 21 meters long, which is too large for even the biggest Russian submarines, and requires its own specialized submarine for launch. Additionally, the Poseidon is considered a second strike capability, meaning it is a weapon that could pose a threat after the start of a nuclear war. Instead of serving a combat function, it is intended to force the enemy to back down in the face of the threat of its use. From a publication by the Washington Post.
Putin also boasted about the alleged serial production of the Oreshnik missiles. But again, this seems more like an information ploy. The Center for Countering Disinformation notes that it launched the first such story back in November 2024 after the strike on Dnipro, and since then has regularly returned to this topic. Although there is no convincing evidence of actual serial production, there have been failed launches and several more information dumps. Experts say this is less about new weaponry and more about an attempt to intimidate and distract attention.
The center analyzed these statements and identified contradictions in the rhetoric of the Russian dictator. He once again announces the start of production of the Oreshnik, even though he previously reported that it had been ongoing for a long time. The Oreshnik is used as a tool of propaganda and intimidation, demonstrating Russia's lack of readiness for constructive dialogue. From a statement by the Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine on Telegram.
Putin's external aggression is increasingly combined with internal irritability. It's very telling that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov never showed up at the historic Security Council meeting where the resumption of nuclear testing was discussed. The phrase absent by agreement sounds unconvincing, since Lavrov was the only permanent member of the Security Council to miss this meeting. Moreover, he no longer leads the Russian delegation at the G20 summits and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Many believe that the head of the foreign ministry fell out of favor after an unsuccessful conversation with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and that Putin is supposedly very dissatisfied with the work of his foreign policy department and the fact that the summit in Budapest was disrupted. And now, Moscow and Washington communicate with each other exclusively in the language of threats.
A veteran of Russian diplomacy and former Russian permanent representative to the UN Security Council, Lavrov held a phone conversation with Rubio on October 21st, during which he was supposed to discuss the terms of the upcoming Putin-Trump summit in Budapest. However, Rubio advised Trump to cancel the meeting. And after the summit was derailed, the U.S. imposed sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil. The first sanctions came as soon as Trump returned to the White House. From a publication by the Moscow Times,
American officials were struck by the steadfastness of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. During a brief meeting with his American counterpart Marco Rubio in New York in September, he spoke about Ukraine being caught in the grip of Nazis. In a phone conversation in October, which ultimately led to the collapse of the Budapest summit, Lavrov essentially repeated the same claims. He seems clearly tired and appears to believe he has more important things to do than meet or engage with the United States, regardless of what Putin wants. From a Financial Times publication.
Putin is increasingly using nuclear rhetoric as his main tool of pressure and self-assertion. Loud statements about new weapons and threats of tests have become his way of demonstrating strength and distracting attention from his own failures. However, it's also important not to underestimate the danger of what's happening. The problem with nuclear standoffs isn't that one side reacts to the other's moves, but that each side is increasingly acting preemptively, based on its own assumptions and fears.
Subscribe to UATV English and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.